Andor Episode 1, titled Casa, started off strong with Andor visiting a space brothel, and this first scene ended up with him killing 2 people because he accidentally killed the first one. Immediately, this telegraphed that this series isn't your daddy's Star Wars. Or is it? What is clear is that the movie about space wizards intended for 9-year-olds have grown up. Honestly, it's a refreshing take. There's no Tatooine, there's no desert planet, and there was water everywhere. And immediately this resulted in people complaining about that there were no Easter eggs in this series. Well, that's not exactly true. There are Easter eggs about, peppered throughout the whole series, if you know where to look. But honestly, you should not be looking for Easter eggs, or content creators should not be planting Easter eggs at the expense of storytelling. Star Wars as a piece of narrative art does not need to make anyone to do a Leo pointing meme every 5 minutes. If all you want is a series of reference to point at, just look up Wikipedia. You can do it all day. And once you're freed from the bonds of pre-existing lore, you could do anything with Star Wars. Because previously Star Wars had a growing problem. It has nowhere to grow. You just keep rehashing everything you've seen before, but now shinier with new technology, for better or worse. CG, depending on your own bias, predispose certain point of view, because after all,
you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Anyway, after all, why would you want to rehash everything that you've seen?
Again, it's like poetry, it's sort of they rhyme.
It's not that there's no room for it. The Kenobi series was fun, in particular the addition of Reva that made it not just a simple Kenobi versus Vader episode. She really gave a lot of flesh to that story, not only as a foil to Kenobi, but also as an echo of what Vader could have been. It's just too bad that the loudmouth racists kept shouting about her skin color that they drowned out all but the most disgusting hateful voice under the pretense that they're not racist. They just want a good story. They got a good story. They're just too cowardly to admit that they're racist about it.
And if you're sending her bullying messages, you're no Star Wars fan in my mind. There's no place for racism in this world. I totally stand with Moses.
But for all the innovation that Andor is presenting on screen, at the very core, it is still Star Wars. It still adheres to the main basic principles that George Lucas laid out in 1977. At the very surface, Andor has a title sequence. Compare this to The Mandalorian and Kenobi, which has a cold start. And it is also in concordance with the Lucasfilm decree that non-saga Star Wars films should not have the title crawl. And just like Rogue One, it doesn't have a title crawl. With one unique thing that it does is that Andor denotes the point in time when this story takes place, which is 5 BBY, as told in the opening location title. The BBY dating system, which stands for Before the Battle of Yavin, that's the one where a radicalized religious terrorist blew up a government facility. While this is the first time it shows up on screen, it's been used before in several canon reference books. But this is not to be confused as a diegetic calendar system, meaning the characters in the Star Wars universe do not use the BBY dating calendar. It would be awkward, like Andor would have been asking, "What year is this?" And people would answer, "Oh, it's 5 years before the Battle of Yavin." And he'd be like, "What's the Battle of Yavin?" Because it hasn't happened yet. It was just this big battle that's gonna happen 5 years from now. Ooh. No, BBY is only used non-diegetically. Diegetically, in the universe, the characters in Star Wars uses what's called the Galactic Standard Calendar. And the difference in Andor goes beyond mere surface details. In Star Wars, usually the stake of the movie is the fate of the galaxy, even when it's just a personal issue with what happened in Kenobi. The resulting repercussions alters the fate of the entire galaxy. In Andor, the inciting incident is not the threat to the universe, but an accidental killing that ended up with intentional murder, while the big motivation of the character is simply to find his sister. The inciting incident for the Cassian's whole arc is his murder of 2 Preox Morlana corpos after some altercation at a cafe. And when the leadership chose to cover up the murder of their own, their underlings decide to take the matter on their own.
This is the murder of 2 Primor employees!
While Andor frames the action of Cyril Khan as overstepping his authorities with blatant disregard to corporate interests. This choice by the writer served to enrich what is realistically something that would have happened. For example, in 2013 Indonesia, after a first sergeant of the military was murdered during an altercation at a cafe, the 4 suspect killers were detained. only for a group of military men to force their way into the prison at gunpoint, disabling the CCTV cameras, cutting the phone service, securing a perimeter, and executed the 4 suspects in their cells. They were shot in the head. Initially, the military superiors denied that their men involved in the attack.
But I've had nothing to do with this.
Well, exactly.
So yes, everything that happened at Preox Morlana was highly plausible. Droid is an essential factor in Star Wars. Before Andor, the last time Diego Luna worked with a droid was in Rogue One. K2SO was a visual effect wet dream. Based on a Ralph McQuarrie design, the droid's disproportion made it impossible for a standard human to be dressed up in a costume like they did with C-3PO. So instead, it has to be done entirely in CGI. Back in the days, this would have been amazing to have this sort of technology to create a character that is impossible for a puppet or human to perform. And that would have wowed the audience who went to see it on the big screen. But these days, with the proliferation of computer graphics technology, when you see something on screen that is impossible to be performed via traditional means, it just means that there is only one way to do it, and it's got to be CGI. So, the audience is a bit jaded by that. But that's not the worst part. While Alan Tudyk delivered stellar performance for K2SO, the experience of shooting it was kind of miserable for having to wear that capture jumpsuit all day long, and the loss of dignity for having a cardboard K2SO sticking up the back of your head.
Because there's no way to respect this, you know?
This is what makes B2MO a really cool droid. Apart from its really awesome design, B2MO was actually a practical effect, an actual droid that they built so the actors can interact with it on stage. There is no undignified costume to wear, and the puppeteers just directly manipulate the droid. Yes, B2MO was entirely practical and controlled via remote. Seeing the final product on site directly as is really does a huge effect on the actors that needs to be interacting with them. Compared to his interview regarding K2SO, Diego Luna appeared clearly far more excited and much happier when he was talking about interacting with B2MO.
It was wonderful to work with him because it's real, it's there, and he interacts with you the way you'll get to see him, you know.
The weirdest thing about Star Wars alien language is that you don't need subtitle translation to understand it. And in keeping with Star Wars tradition, most, if not all, the non-galactic basic standard language spoken in Andor was not translated. Basic is what they call English in Star Wars. We don't see subtitles when Chewbacca is talking, nor do we see one when R2-D2 is talking. And we do not see any single translation for this language that the Qanari speak. The word Qanari itself is of Southeast Asian origin. It means walnut, a plant of Southeast Asian origin. And the Qanari tribe really does invoke a lot of Southeast Asian tribal origins, even down to the demise of the form of an environmental disaster or a mining accident, or so they say. While officially not revealed, at least yet, people suspect that the actual mine used in the Andor series is the same one used in Kenobi. The massive mine depicted on screen appears to be Middle Peak Quarry, but the extent of the environmental damage depicted echoes that of the Grasberg mine located in West Papua. Once a key contention between the Dutch and Indonesian government, until Kennedy stepped in to force the Dutch's hand and gave the Papuan as a present to appease the Indonesian president, which at the time exhibited tendencies to sympathize for the Soviet bloc. The Papuan was handed over to the Indonesian by referendum supposedly held at gunpoint, and yet the Indonesian president remained belligerent to their Western imperial master. He was later toppled by a Washington-backed coup. This tactic, referred to as the Jakarta method, became the template for other CIA operations to topple foreign governments. As dark as Star Wars wanted to make a sci-fi series on a rebellion against the Empire, the atrocities committed and the sentiment expressed pales in comparison with the real things done by Western imperial power. In Andor, Qanari was described as a mid-rim planet that has closed due to an imperial mining disaster.
Abandoned and considered toxic, imperial prohibition.
Which means nobody's allowed to land on the planet's surface. Well, we knew that the crew of the Republican transport that crashed on Qanari seemed unwell. Presumably, this is the result of the toxic material that turned their skin yellow, and we get to see the extent of the environmental disaster left behind. Usually, as a science fiction space opera, disasters in Star Wars tend to be in the form of some amazing fantasy work.
Wayfinder's there.
Mining disaster, sure, and mining itself is an environmental disaster, and the local native tribe have no say in the matter at all, both in Qanari and in Papua. The worst part is, the Empire doesn't play by the rules, and just like the Dani tribe, there is nothing the Qanari can do to change these imperialist attitude.
They don't care enough to learn.
Perhaps the silver lining that the Qanari has is that Qanari is now restricted and seemingly forgotten by most of the galaxy. But we later find out
there were no survivors on Qanari.
I wonder though, when Marva and Clem rescued Casa from that ship, there was a Republic frigate approaching, presumably to investigate the crash and mining disaster. But do you suppose that they restricted Qanari because they wanted to contain the environmental disaster? Or did the Republican frigate arriving was to conduct a secret mining operation of some sort? It's one of the nicest things about Star Wars. They can be rather vague about something and then just expand it as a story
for another time.
Don't forget to subscribe for more pop culture positivity, and thank you for watching.